We're back out here once again, and today we're talking about how effective spinnerbaits and swim baits can be during the month of September. And have I got a hack for you that is sure to change how you fish a swim bait? Stick around, you don't want to miss this one.
There we go. Ooh, that's a nice one. That's a good fish.
And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. In the past couple of videos, we've been talking a lot about the fall transition and how it's starting to pick up steam the further into September and into the fall that we get. Cooler nighttime temperatures are causing that water temperature to come down, which in turn puts those bass on the move. They start to migrate from the deep water into predictable places. They follow those same migration routes. We talked about that in the last video. But we also know that they're still going to be feeding up on those bait balls, on those tiny little bait fish that are swimming around in those schools. It's an easy meal. It's not what those bass are going to be feeding on exclusively, but it gives us something to target, something that we know those bass are going to be interested in. So that helps out quite a lot. What are some of the presentations that we're using? Well, a good old swim bait, right? And this right here, this is the lowbrow rig. This is what you guys have started calling this a couple years ago. Just a little bitsy flip or a bitsy bug jig head that I've taken the skirt off and put a small swim bait on. I can work this right through the grass. I can work it right from the bank, and it does remarkably well. In my area, in my fisheries with a lot of vegetation in them, this is the ticket to fishing a normal swim bait. Now, if I'm fishing more off the bank in a little bit deeper water and I could come across the top of that vegetation, then I don't need to have this setup. I can use just your regular standard jig head, and that works just fine. I've caught a lot of fish doing that. I've caught a lot of fish with that particular presentation for sure. I use it from the bank quite often. If I'm fishing a swim bait from the bank, that's going to be the setup that I use because it just works. Because everywhere on the big lake, there is a ring of hydrilla that skirts the bank. It just encircles the entire bank all the way around the lake. It might break off just a little bit as it gets deeper and pulls back away from the bank and gets a little bit more sparse. But if you're in shallow water or if you're near the bank, there will be hydrilla there. So that little swim bait trick, that helps a lot. Another bait that we're going to use, another bait that works very, very well is going to be a spinnerbait because that actually, it mimics that school, right? You get those bait fish school, those little balls of bait that the bass are going after in the first place. Now, they may chase a lone fish or they may chase a lone swim bait thinking it looks a lot like what they're feeding on, but it's always best, I found, to work a swim bait in those schools or near those schools. With a spinnerbait, you have a little bit more freedom. You have a little bit more ease of use when it comes to that because you're basically creating your own school. You have your own school when it comes to a spinnerbait. And this guy, this is what I was working the last time out. This is just a double willow blade, double gold willow blade. We had some sun, we had just a little bit of wind, so I dialed it back rather than going with the tandem blade, the Colorado blade and the willow blade, you know, usually a silver or a white spinnerbait. This time I went with this green one with this little swim bait, which we'll get back to, and just this double willow blade, and it worked for me very well. This was actually one of the biggest bite getters all day whenever I was out there. You know, I tried starting out with the shad pattern with the white and the silver. Didn't get a lot of notice with that. So I went with this green pattern. I went with the double willow blade, and I noticed that small change, that little adjustment was all I needed to get those fish fired up. So that really helped. Sometimes, as we've said before, sometimes it all comes out to the small tweaks. Those small tweaks are the things that you need to make to really dial that presentation in. And that's kind of the point of this video because I've got a trick I want to show you that is totally going to change how you fish a swim bait, how you fish a spinnerbait, it's going to blow your mind. And you know, it's so obvious. To me, it was so obvious. You've got to think there's a lot of people doing it, although I've never seen anybody else doing it. Now, what is that? Well, we're going to talk all about that little trick. All right. So in order to set this up, we want to look at a few things. This right here, this is a Willow's swim bait head from Z-Man. I know they got to end everything with Z. So this is a Willow's swim bait head. It's just a 1/4 ounce swim bait head, and it's got this little blade on it that acts kind of like a vibrating jig or a blading jig mixed with a swim bait. Seems like a good idea. I have several of these, but they didn't really work the way I wanted them to. They didn't work as I thought they would. Now, they definitely thump and they definitely vibrate, but they're all over the place in the water. They kind of move helter-skelter. They have a very erratic movement. And granted, that sounds good on paper, but that's not necessarily what I'm looking for when it comes to fishing a swim bait or a spinnerbait. So I turned to something, an old school friend of any angler. If you've been bass fishing for any length of time, any amount of time, then you know what this is. This is a beetle spin, right? This is just a little 1/8 size, and it's got that single little Colorado blade, and it's got that little clip on there. You can take these off and just turn it into a regular ball head jig. I know a lot of guys who fish it that way. I know one person in particular who likes to take the clip off of these and just fish it with a curly tail grub. You know who you are. But beetle spin, I've been using these since I was a kid. This is one of the first baits that I would call a confidence bait. I never, ever took a beetle spin off. I fished this, and if I was fishing anything else at all, it was a Mepps spinner, an inline spinner, but we always called them a Mepps when I was growing up on the Fox chain there in Illinois. Beetle spin, back in the day, back in the 1970s and the late 1970s and the early 1980s, when I was really cutting my teeth as far as bass fishing goes, that was basically the deal. A beetle spin was my favorite bait. It was easy to use, and it caught all kinds of fish. It caught bluegill, it caught crappie, and it caught bass. So why do I bring that up? Well, we were talking about a spinnerbait and we were talking about a swim bait. And if you notice something here, we have the tools to Frankenstein something together to make something that's more, that it's greater than the sum of its parts. And that is this guy right here. This is a regular 1/4 ounce swim bait head. It's got a screw lock on it, and I have clipped a beetle spin blade to it. Now, the good thing about a beetle spin is they come in various sizes, and they also come with various different blades, right? We've got the normal ones, and then we've got those little ones right there. You know, we've got the bigger ones and we've got the little ones, so you don't have to have a big blade. You might want to just add just a little bit of subtle flash to it, but I've got that bigger blade on this. That came off of a 1/4 ounce beetle spin. I put it on a regular swim bait jig head, and I've got a small 3-inch swim bait. And what kind of swim bait is that? Well, I said we were going to talk about those, and we are. It's this guy right here. This is a new swim bait that I'm trying because this was the smallest swim bait I could find in the store. I know you can get smaller ones online. This is just a 3-inch. This is a Rapala Crush City. This is called the Mayor, and the color is Gizzard Shad. These things are great. Pick these up at Academy. You can probably get them at Walmart, probably get them at Dick's or online. If you can find them at your local mom and pop tackle shops, go there first. But if you can't, order it from someplace else. I'm telling you, these little 3-inch swim baits were the perfect size for what I was looking for. Now I've got this just on a regular spinner setup. This is my finesse spinner. This is a medium 7-foot rod. It's got a softer, moderate fast tip on it. I've got this on a regular spinning combo with 10-pound braid to about a 12-foot, 8-pound co-poly leader. I can use mono or I can use a fluorocarbon, but I chose to go with a co-poly just to have just a little bit more stretch to give those finicky bass the ability to take that down before I went to set the hook. But that combination is absolute money during the fall. Now, I've talked about doing this before. I've talked about this in a video I did a couple of years ago about doing this exact setup. and it works amazingly well. If you can find a small swim bait in the fall time to mimic, to imitate those little tiny new of the year bait fish, something like this little 3-inch swim bait is going to be a bit on the bigger side for that, but if you're fishing it around those schools, it will definitely stand out. It's one of my biggest tricks. It's one of my best producing tricks. If I see those bass are keying off on those smaller fish, then that's a trick I'm going to be pulling out. I'm going to be using this little bait right here, this little 3-inch swim bait, and if I can use a 2.5-inch, I will go with that. But just a regular beetle spin blade that I've clipped on there. Now, the only thing you have to think about when you're doing this, the only thing you really need to worry about is clipping this on the right way, because you can easily clip it backwards and then it doesn't work at all. And make sure that you're doing the line tie. When you're tying your line, you are going through that particular spot, not the line tie on the jig head. But other than that, no worries, nothing to worry about. It should be pretty easy to do. Everybody's got beetle spins. A swim bait is easy to rig up, so give that a try. I'm telling you, it works in deeper water. It works in shallower water. I was using it much the same way I would use a regular swim bait and a regular spinner bait. I would fish it near the bank, near cover, near structure, near grass lines, right along those vegetation lines that are near the bank. That's where it was most productive on my fishery, but I've also had a lot of success fishing them around laydowns. And I've also had a lot of success fishing them in shallow hydrilla flats. Now, not so much the dense part, but as we approach that hydrilla flat, especially if there's a submerged creek channel through there, I will fish that little beetle spin, that little beetle swim, as I call it. I will fish that little beetle swim right along that current seam, right along that vegetation line, and that's where I'm getting most of my bites. So if you haven't tried something like that, if you've never done it before, I'm telling you, it's simple. It doesn't cost but maybe $1.50 to do, because a Johnson beetle spin is not expensive. $1.25, $1.50, depending on where you get them from. Super cheap, super easy to get, and you probably have a bunch of those already. So give that a try. Give your swim bait just a little bit of flash. You want to use a little blade? Then you can go with something, just a little tiny blade. Just a little bit of flash. You would be surprised at how much of a difference that makes. So there you have it. A super easy hack for your swim baits that really causes them to stand out. It draws the attention of those bass, and it can get some really huge strikes. If you haven't tried it yet, I'm telling you, you're not going to be disappointed. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.